Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, that was a far more generous speech from Scott Simpson than that of the ministers. In fact, I suppose if we were to use a racing parlance, after the minister's speech we could say he well and truly scratched himself. And I have to say, sir, that you would think that this proposition, as Ruth Dyson said, you'd think this proposition had all been the work and the idea of the government. I had to look up, I thought I'll look up a couple of, I went on to punters.com to look up a couple of definitions. And I thought, what would fit the minister's contribution? I thought for a while, sir, and then I found it. And it's a quintessential Australian punting term. He, Mr Smith, I think, sir, could be described as a coat tugger. And the definition, sir, of a coat tugger is someone who offers a punter a tip and wants a percentage and demands a percentage of the winnings. And after that speech, sir, he fits the description and the definition, sir, of a coat tugger absolutely clearly. Sir, absolutely. This is a minister who got up, and I counted how many times he said the government, and I think it was about 22. The government did this. The government's responsible for this. They've got to come to me to consult. All his own work, of course, when we actually know that this idea had nothing to do with the coat-tugging minister. It had nothing to do with him. This idea was the genesis of the Riccarton Racing Club. People like Roger Finlay, eminent business person, and his fellow board members and trustees of the Riccarton Racing Club thought long and hard about how they could utilise their asset. And they engendered this idea, they planned it, they thought it through, and they went to the government and said, hey, we've got an idea that could help us as a club, but also help a lot of people in Christchurch who'd lost their homes via the earthquake, and they came up with a 600 housing plan. And yes, this Parliament, and this is a government bill and a local bill, this Parliament is responsible for facilitating that through the legislative process, as is normal. But you've got to say, and I return to Scott Simpson, who I think made a far more measured and generous speech than the minister did, you've got to say that, you know, this was the archetypal definition of coat tugging, sir, by that minister. A guy who gives you a tip and demands a percentage of the winnings, sums him up. But we should celebrate this, the passage of this legislation, sir. We should celebrate it, and credit to that member back there. Credit should go where credit is due. Yes, to the racing club, to the City Council, to Ngāi Tahu and the other stakeholders who assisted in this. Credit should go where credit is due. 600 houses, 30% of which will be affordable homes. The ceiling is, what, $450,000. That will still be a struggle for many in the Canterbury and Christchurch community. But, sir, it is an excellent initiative. And if I were Dr. Nick Smith, I'd actually, look at that and say, well, the way to deal with a housing crisis, even though he won't admit there is one, is to do what the Riccarton Racing Club has proposed, and that is build more houses. Right. It's actually a pretty simple proposition, pretty basic. Even for some of the less sharper tools in the box in this chamber, it's a pretty simple concept. And actually what will happen, and is what's starting to ultimately happen in Christchurch, according to projections, is we will end up in that province of Canterbury with a surplus of housing. And you can see in some of the figures, house prices have, plateaued a little in certain places as the construction has come on stream, as those houses have been built, and as people have got out of their old munted property into a viable and new home. It's a pretty simple proposition, supply and demand. When I did fifth form economics, it adds up, and it could be replicated, sir. It could be replicated, sir, around the entire country, especially Auckland, if the government had a mind to become involved in that proposition. Now, the ministers want to get up and talk about consents and, little bits of paper like that, but as others have said in this chamber, a consent, you can't live in a consent. A consent is permission to build on a piece of land.
Consent warming party.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting point, actually. Maybe Dr. Smith could have, as my colleague said, a consent warming party, sir. But a consent, a party of one, yeah, and a bit of a punt at the same time. Sir, the Riccarton Racing Club and its facilities and the Riccarton market, and we've said these things before as colleagues, as Canterbury colleagues, and we can't say it enough. These are iconic parts of our city. Many people in our province have gained much pleasure in participating not only in the racing club activities, often they've lost a bit of dough, but they've not only engaging in the racing club activities, but the utilisation, many community organisations and private sector organisations have utilised those facilities for many events, many of them charitable, many that members of Parliament are invited to. The Riccarton market is a staple in the weekend calendar of most Cantabrians when they want to go and participate, and we're pleased that that will be preserved. And the club itself will be far stronger financially and far more secure in its future, thanks to their own good idea, their own initiative, and their own innovation. And it would be nice if the government could actually show a similar set of skills in respect of innovative ideas. If they could give credit where credit is due, I think this is a shining example of what can be achieved with collaboration. Smart people in Canterbury getting together, doing a deal, coming to the government with a sound proposition that will meet a whole series of needs, sir. None more important, of course, than housing people who are in great need. Equally, sir, this is an example of where political cooperation, putting aside, the lack of generosity of some speeches, where political cooperation can lead to a very viable outcome. But there are other issues, as Ruth Dyson and others have raised. I know the area very well. As I've said in other speeches, in the early years of my life, grew up about a block away across the road, across the Oldhurst Road from I know it well. And as I said in other speeches, in those days it was a pretty sleepy area. You didn't have traffic jams.
1878.
You didn't have, thank you for that. You didn't have, you can pick your enemies but not your friends. As I say, it was a pretty subdued area. It is a nice area. It will change with 600 houses there. There will be infrastructure difficulties. Traffic will be a huge one. And I think what the Riccarton Club and the City Council and the other stakeholders will look to, sir, is for some government leadership, not government telling them what to do, but some government involvement and partnership to deal with some of those infrastructure problems, the most stressful being traffic. You look at what's happening down Johns Road by the airport, the widening, the four laning, that's a good thing. That is a good thing. Access from Hornby into that Yaldhurst area is huge now. The traffic volumes are immense. They will only get worse, and if planning and infrastructure and resources don't follow, then what is a fantastic project for that part of town and for our city will experience some difficulties. And, of course, those people who are already resident in that area of Avonhead and Norton's Road and the Racecourse area around there and Hornby, they can be impacted as well. So what we look forward to, sir, hopefully, is some indications from the government that they will be a participant and a partner in this in respect of the infrastructure requirements. So the Labor Party, and as other colleagues have said, sir, has much pleasure in supporting the legislation. And again, I think congratulations to the Riccarton Racing Club. Credit where credit is due to them and their board, their trustees and the other stakeholders, sir. And it would be great that off the back of this, once we've passed this legislation, the government could use this as an excellent example of what can be achieved to deal with housing difficulties. There should be no reason where there's political will that these sorts of schemes of arrangement couldn't be replicated, say, in Auckland or in other parts of New Zealand, if the land is available. So I would say, in closing, sir, congratulations to the Select Committee and the Chairman, I'm told, did an excellent job in respect of this legislation, and we look forward to those houses being built, and more especially we look forward to the 30% of affordable homes, the people moving into those and getting on with their lives.